Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and One Love family, to the Seth Garu podcast on Maker's Bar, where we are creating 1 million leaders today for tomorrow. Now, what if I ask you, what are you going to do with this wild, adventurous life of yours? I'm paraphrasing a little bit from our guest today, John Graham, a worldwide adventurer and great storyteller and author. And he begs that question of us: what are we going to do with this life? Well, in his life, not only has he traveled and spoken all over the world, but he's experienced things that some of us have only read in stories. Let's talk about a shipwreck, or we can even talk about our involvement or lack of involvement in apartheid. He was one of the individuals that had participation. I'm butchering those words, forgive me, in ending some of that, as well as many other adventures. And today, with his storytelling ability and hopefully my probing questions, we can get to know this man a little more as one of our true American heroes. I'm extremely pleased and honored to have Sir John Graham. And I say Sir John Graham because I've self-knighted him as far as our American history. John, I got to tell you, we are so pleased to have you on my program today.
Well, I'm pleased to be here, Seth. Yeah, I'm knighted. Okay, fine. That's never happened before, but yeah, I'll go with that. Yeah.
Well, under that knighthood, I in reading about who you were and what you've experienced in your life, I myself would love to consider myself a storyteller, but I have not nearly lived the life you have lived. And I'm extremely honored and pleased to get into some of that today for you to share that with us.
Well, I've certainly got lots of stories. The bumper sticker for my life is, I'm lucky to be alive. And there's a lot more flows from that.
I've in researching some of your history, I can see that. How about this? Let's start with your childhood. Where were you born and raised? And give us a little insight to your childhood.
Well, I was born and raised in Tacoma, Washington, a small city in Washington State. And it's a place where nothing ever happened. I lived in a community where nothing ever happened. Came from a family where nothing ever happened. Everything was great. I had a nice middle-class existence. I was expected to go to the University of Washington, where my father and my sister had gone, and then settle down and marry the girl next door and live out my life out there. And, that was what was set up for me. And then it turned out through a series of freak occasions, incidents, that I ended up going for a summer to the Far East as a member of the crew of a freighter. Now, in those years, we're talking now 1959, freighters were not container ships. They were just big boats run by 50 or 60 really tough guys. And that's how they loaded and unloaded the stuff. Well, I was really happy to go there because I needed something different. I was badly bullied in grade school, middle school, high school. I hated the bullies. And yet I grew up so fast that I was uncoordinated and unable to defend myself. So it was a pretty miserable adolescence. And I was looking for some examples of manhood. I mean, well, how do you become a man if I get beaten up all the time? I looked at my father. I mean, I love my dad, of course, but he was an extraordinarily gentle man. He got pushed around at work or in the community, and I saw that, and I felt disappointed in him. And I kept looking and looking, and all of a sudden, I get this job on this freighter going to the Far East for the summer. Well, these 50 or 60 tough guys, I'm telling you, big muscles and tattoos and. He took one look at me, this skinny, scrawny little kid from Tacoma, Washington, and they were determined to give me life lessons, Seth, that they knew I would never get in school or in Tacoma. And they didn't disappoint. Now, this being a family station, I won't be explicit as to what all those lessons were, but let me tell you that they made good on their vow. Which most important thing perhaps was on the very first night. I was just 17 years old. just 17 that week. And I was out on the deck, and one of the crewmen came up to me and began making sexual advances. Okay. So another guy, a big black guy named Roy, must have weighed 250, 60 pounds. He grabs this first guy, shoves him up against the bulkhead, and then there was a let loose with a stream of cussing. Oh, it was magnificent cussing. Oh, I never heard cussing. And then he slapped the guy down on the deck, and the guy goes off whimpering. And so I go back to my cabin that night, and I think, that's it. That's it. That's the model of manhood. Roy is the example I need to be a man. Look at what he did. And so I practiced slamming an imaginary foe up against the wall of the cabin. And then I practiced trying to cuss like Roy was cussing. Oh, man, it felt so, so good. And that trip changed my life. I mean, there was a barroom brawl. There was all kinds of stuff happened on that trip. And I discovered that there was a huge world beyond Tacoma, Washington. Huge, colorful, exciting world beyond Tacoma, Washington. Because in 1959, it was like Terry and the Pirates. It wasn't big container ships with computers and stuff. It was a big, raw world, and I was right in the middle of it. I come back from that, totally changed. I told my parents I want to go to sea for the rest of my life. I want to be a seaman. Of course, they said, forget that. Anyway, a year or two later, after a year of college, I'm hitchhiking in Europe. And I see in the newspaper in the youth hostel in Zermatt, Switzerland, that there's a war going on just a few hundred miles south. A colonial war. A bunch of rebels were trying to take control of Algeria from the French. And there was a bitter war going on. Well, I'd never been in a war before. And so that seemed like a hell of an adventure because I was still looking for more Roys in my life, more adventures. So I hitchhiked down through Morocco and I step across the border into Algeria. Now, of course, there's a war going on. There's no border guards, but at least I'm smart enough to put an American flag on my chest so that the rebels won't take me as a Frenchman and shoot me. I shouldn't have worried. The rebels were extremely helpful to me. They'd stop cars going in my direction at gunpoint and tell the driver to take me where I wanted to go. So I spent a couple of weeks in the middle of a war in Algeria, walked through all kinds of stuff. Too young and dumb to know it might be dangerous. And I stayed sometimes with French Foreign Legionnaires who are also, like Roy, big, tough guys with muscles and tattoos. And they also saw that they had to teach me some life lessons. So I really looked at those French Foreign Legionnaires, and I looked at Roy, and I was reading books and watching movies at the time with people like John Wayne and others. And I really got very clear that that's what I wanted to be. And I had to be like that, not just if they were my idols, I had to be like them. And so I rode crew in college. So I put on 30 pounds of muscles. So in a few more years, I was 6.5 feet tall and really strong and tough, and you didn't mess with me. So no more bullies. But then I was totally embarked in a life of adventure. Midway through college, I was with a group of guys that decided we would take on the first ascent of one of the most dangerous, maybe the most dangerous mountain wall in the world. It was bigger top to bottom than anything on Mount Everest. It was the north wall of Mount McKinley, Denali in Alaska. It was to climb so dangerous that no one had ever tried it, and no one's ever tried it since, but we succeeded. And there were a half a dozen times when we should have been wiped out by avalanches or fallen in crevasses or whatever. And we walked through it all. We made that first ascent. And so by the time that climb ended, I was utterly convinced not only that I had found the path to manhood, but that I had found that I, John Graham, was indestructible. And that meant that I could do more and more dangerous things because I would walk away from all of them. And I did. Graduated from college. I hitchhiked around the world, not the water parts, of course, but hitchhiked across the land masses and the world. And I got a contract from the Boston Globe to write war stories as a war correspondent. And I wrote stories from wars that were then going on in Cyprus, Laos, and Eritrea, and the beginning of the war in Vietnam. And I walked through all these difficult and dangerous situations, by then knowing that I was indestructible. So I just kept doing it. But then I realized that I couldn't do
Well,
this.
real quick,
Yeah.
John, if you don't mind me asking, about what age were you at this time?
Oh, well, I had just graduated from college when I hitchhiked around the world. So that was 22, still pretty young.
22. Okay.
Anyway, I realized, since I wasn't independently wealthy, that if I wanted to be a professional adventurer, I had to pay for it somehow. So I needed to get a job. And I decided that the way to do that was to join the U.S. Foreign Service. But I wasn't a diplomat the way most Foreign Service officers are. I didn't work in embassies. I got the Foreign Service to send me to jungles and deserts for wars and revolutions. I was, for example, in the middle of the revolution in Libya that brought Gaddafi to power in 1969.
Oh, wow.
Oh, but I loved it, Seth. I just absolutely loved it, because there I was in Tripoli, Libya. Everybody else at the embassy was absolutely freaking out when they saw the first cars burning in the streets and rock throwing mobs. But I loved it. Oh, man, that was the life I wanted. Rock throwing mobs. What fun. So I walked away.
This was during the war correspondency?
No, sorry, I got ahead of myself. The war correspondence was on the way to a few months of graduate study in Australia. And it was in Australia I realized that I needed to get a job, that I wasn't independently wealthy. I had applied to the U.S. Foreign Service. I got the notice that I had a job. And so I came back to Washington, D.C. and told them what I just told your audience, that I didn't want to go to an embassy. I wanted the tough guy stuff. I wanted to go to jungles and deserts, and they sent me to jungles and deserts. And that answers your question, I hope.
Yes. Yes, it does.
So
yes.
By then I was an FSO, a Foreign Service officer, whose path of advancement was wars and revolutions, not nice stuff in embassies in Europe. So by then, I totally hooked on adrenaline. I told the Foreign Service to send me to the war in Vietnam, which was, then raging. And I told them, moreover, that I wanted them to send me to the most difficult and dangerous assignment they had in the war in Vietnam. And they didn't disappoint. They sent me to a small city called Hue. Some of your viewers may remember, if they're old enough, that Hue was the scene of the Tet Massacre in 1968. Anyway, it was only 50 miles south of the demarcation line that then separated North Vietnam from South Vietnam. So it was a hell of a dangerous place to be, let me tell you. And every day I didn't know whether I would be killed or not with a car bomb or an assassin's bullet. Because I was totally exposed, but I was just absolutely loving it. And by then I was a kid. I was then 28.
What were your duties?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Seth, I interrupted you.
That's okay. Your duties. What were your specific duties during the time while you were over there?
Yeah.
Nominally, or can you not tell? If you can't tell.
No. It's been enough years. Nominally, I was the advisor to the mayor of Hue, and doing all kinds of winning hearts and minds stuff. But in point of fact, I was there as a political officer, which is a polite way of saying I was involved in a lot of the nasty stuff, ferreting out the Viet Cong underground, for example, intelligence and counterintelligence operations, which made my job really, really dangerous because I was totally exposed, especially when almost as soon as I got there, the U.S. began withdrawing troops under the peace agreements in Vietnam in 1971-72. So the 101st Airborne was no longer there to protect me. And I was there with a few other civilians. So we were civilians, Foreign Service officers. And so I had no protection at all. And not only that, but the Nixon White House wanted pictures of me on the nightly news back in the States. Of walking into patties and shaking hands with happy, smiling peasants, so that the American TV viewers back in this would see that we were winning the war, that the South Vietnamese were winning it on their own. Here's John Graham shaking hands with happy, smiling peasants. Everything is going terrific, etc. A big lie, of course. It always a total big lie, and I knew it was a big lie.
Propaganda. We'd say propaganda, wouldn't we?
It was called Vietnamization, which is the long word the Nixon White House used to describe what it said was a handing over of the war to the South Vietnamese, who could then win it on their own, which was a total fabrication. By then, I knew perfectly well that would never happen. There wasn't the political glue to keep South Vietnam together. I knew the war was lost. I hated the war. I thought it was stupid and evil and wrong. I knew it was unwinnable. I was only in Vietnam because of the adrenaline rush. I mean, that's it. I was only there because a shooting war with a target on my back for a year and a half was the only way for me to get that adrenaline rush. I mean, it was nuts, but that's where it was. That's where I was closing in on my 30th birthday. And then all of a sudden it wasn't. And then came a real turning point in my life. I don't know, some of your viewers may remember that before Vietnam fell in 1975, a few years before that, 1972, the North Vietnamese tried to overrun South Vietnam in what was then called the Easter Offensive. In April, May 1972, they stormed across that demilitarized zone, heading straight for where I was. Again, as I said, there was no American troops there to defend me, only some South Vietnamese army troops. And they were ill-equipped. They were frightened. Some of their leaders had fled. They were a sorry bunch. And very soon, the North Vietnamese had come within 6 miles away. I mean, like 6 miles. And they were about to overrun it. And I was trapped inside. I couldn't get out because if the U.S. tried to send a helicopter to rescue me, I'd have the South Vietnamese would be trying to get on that helicopter too, and I'd have to shoot them off the skids. I mean, it was a horrible situation. And I'll never forget one particular night when the North Vietnamese were closing in. The problem I had was that with most of the South Vietnamese officials, cowards I would call them, broke and ran, it was my job to create martial law in the city so that the few South Vietnamese troops fighting to defend it could get ammunition from the port and try to stave off the North Vietnamese, who, as I said, were within 6 miles of the city gates. So I had to do that. I had to create a stable martial law in the city, and I and 3 other guys, we did that, and it was an incredible evening. I mean, the problem was, at that point, not so much the North Vietnamese, but deserters from the South Vietnamese army who were raping and looting and pillaging. So we were sitting there with our mouths open, with the artillery booming. The marketplace was in flames. It had been set on fire by the deserters. The whole town was paralyzed. 250,000 people had rushed down, had rushed out of the city towards safety in Da Nang. More refugees were streaming in from the battlefield to the north. And it was my job to create martial law in the middle of all this chaos. And I realized that I couldn't do that as long as the deserters were terrifying the people and preventing the ammunition from getting to the few South Vietnamese troops still willing to defend it. So I remember going to the deputy mayor, who was one of the few officials still brave enough to have stuck it out. And I demanded that he set up a firing squad and start shooting the deserters as a way of creating some law and order in the city. And then it occurred to me, here I was on this guy's office, slamming my fist down on his desk, screaming at him that we were all going to die unless we managed to beat back the North Vietnamese. And that could only happen if we started shooting deserters so that there was enough means to get ammunition to the South Vietnamese who were still fighting to the north. And then it hit me. Here I was. My home was 7,000 miles away. I knew this war from the very beginning. I knew this war was lost. I also knew it was wrong and stupid. I also knew the only reason I was there, Seth, the only reason I was there was for the adrenaline rush, because of all the adventures I'd had, mountain climbing, revolutions, whatever, I'd never been in a place that dangerous for that long. And I was there for a year and a half. And I initially I loved it, but then I realized that I was no longer a kid, like the kid that sailed on that ship 10 years before. No, I was an adult, and I was making decisions that were costing people their lives in a war I didn't believe in. And it finally hit me, man. Like, I got gobsmacked. How could I have let my life become that shallow? I wasn't a monster. At least I didn't think of myself as a monster, but I was behaving like a monster. I was doing all these things because of my own needs for adrenaline, my own needs for adventure, my own needs for violence. And it was all of a sudden it hit me that was wrong. It was immoral. How could I have let my life become that shallow? And I remember, I think I even wept. I mean, at the time, in the middle of all this chaos, that it suddenly hit me that I couldn't go on living a life like that. And it hit me full force as the artillery was blasting. It just hit me full force. What had it?
Can I interrupt you really quick, John?
Yeah.
During that time, if you don't mind me, this is a little, since it is tantalizing somewhat. So was this during the time actually where you requested that they start shooting deserters? Was that occurring at this time?
Yeah, it happened. And it was after that firing squad was set up. And I realized that my needs for adrenaline were killing people. And I also realized that I should have said this. The deserters were not seasoned soldiers. They were kids dragooned off their rice paddies, 17 years old, 16, and thrown into the front lines. And they were scared out of their wits. And so they were drunk and high on drugs or whatever, and doing all these awful things, creating havoc within the city. But they were basically innocent. They were farm boys. And now I was going to start killing them in the hopes that we could then start killing other Vietnamese, that is to say, the North Vietnamese 6 miles away. And I didn't believe in this war. And it was just a mess, a moral mess for me. And it suddenly caught up with me that these lives were at stake, not for any real military reason. They were there because of my own needs for adrenaline, being there in the first place and doing what I was doing. And I don't know if it answers your question or not, but
it does.
I realized what I had done, that I put my head down and had this realization that my life had sunk to a new low. Turned out that the next morning, the weather broke, the clouds broke, and Phantom F-4s from the American carriers off the coast were finally able to fly in and bomb the hell out of the North Vietnamese advancing troops and turn them back. So my life again was saved. And I got out of there and came back. Was sent to California, I guess, as a reward for not getting killed. And I had a heavy dose of what we now would call PTSD. I mean, I would walk on the shadow sides of the streets in Palo Alto, California, because I was afraid of sniper fire. But mostly I was there to dig myself out of this self-centered, immoral hole. I needed to find a life. I needed to find who I was. I needed to find a John Graham who, in fact, was compassionate, who cared about more than himself. And it turned out in those years in California, there were things, only in California, I guess, called encounter groups, where you met with 12, 15 other people and spilled your guts in the hope that maybe you might find something about yourself that would help your life. And so it worked.
There, John, really quick, was some of this, because I guess I'd like to delve into this, was some of this because you were actually witness to some of the killings and so forth, and that was the largest part that was weighing on you? Or was it was it in addition to your opposition to the war? What were some of those combination of effects that you felt would cause you to feel this way? In addition
Sure.
to the self-reflection, you had the self-reflection that how did your life become this shallow? But I'd imagine though witnessing those things, what impact did that have, and how did that impact you? Would you say that was directly correlated to the PTSD?
No, I think the PTSD was your garden variety PTSD that a lot of soldiers felt. Uh, and it was like, it was all of that. Answer your question, it was all of that. And I remember sitting down when I had this revelation and putting my head down and feeling the cold metal of my 45 rubbing against my hip, putting my head down on a desk and just weeping. And when I just really had come to realize that what I had done, setting up that firing squad and a life that was unbelievably shallow, and now I was a murderer. And it was not just the firing squad, it was a decade of selfish behavior, of behavior where the only thing that mattered was adventuring, violent adventures. I'd gone way past wanting to be John Wayne. I'd become a monster. And I fully realized that at the time. And I just didn't care about other people. And that wasn't right. I had a sense that there was a kinder, gentle person in me, but I couldn't find it. It was like, Seth, beginning almost with that trip on the freighter as a kid. It was almost like I'd taken a heavy sheet of plywood and nailed it over my chest so that I couldn't feel my heart. I couldn't feel any compassion. All I could feel was the adrenaline rush. And that had kept me going for another decade until that moment in the battle of in the Easter Offensive, the battle for a way in April, May 1972. Until that moment, that's how I was living my life. And all of a sudden, that whole moral framework just collapsed. And I was lucky to make it out alive, come back to California. And finally, in this encounter group, I had a bunch of other men confirm for me that, yeah, sure, I was a tough guy adventurer. Yeah, sure, they believed all my stories. I really had done all that shit. I really had. But I was way more than John Wayne. What they saw in me was a compassionate human being who had hidden that compassion behind that heavy wall of plywood. And I needed to get real. I needed to stop being so goddamn selfish about my own needs and look to other people, look to the world, and reach for that compassion, that compassionate self that they saw that I couldn't see at the time. And so I began searching, thanks to those guys in that encounter group. I began searching for that other John Graham. And I slowly began to find it. Turned out the State Department helped me, not deliberately, but it turned out they helped me by sending me to the United Nations. Now, mind you, for me, crawling out of that self-centered hole was 3 steps up and 2 steps back. You know, it wasn't easy. It wasn't a straight line. I had generations, decades of behavior to unlearn, and I had to search for compassion and all and a heart, and it took me a while to find it. But at the United Nations, that's where it all really came to me. And that
What
brings
was your
up,
role at the United Nations?
yeah, the State Department put me in charge of African policies, and because no one at the State Department really cared about the so-called third world, that is to say, all the black and brown people in the world, they put me in charge of it because what the hell, I was a middle grade officer and nobody else cared but John. So by then, this is now 3 or 4 years since that incident with the firing squad. I really had done a U-turn. I really had completely reoriented my own inner self. I had found a heart. I began to develop real friendships with people. I began to be a responsible father to my 2 kids. I began to find the compassionate person that had been buried deep inside since those bullies in Tacoma, Washington, 20 years before. I began to find all that, and all of a sudden I'm there dealing with these peace and justice issues at the United Nations in the so-called third world. And there were plenty of them. God knows, there was poverty, disease, violence, all the things that I had ignored beforehand. I'd seen it all, but I ignored it because it wasn't adrenaline producing, so I ignored it. But now I really was paying attention to it. So I began to use my skills, and I had a lot of skills. I do have a lot of skills as a negotiator, and I was a tough guy. And so I began doing what I could do to change American policies, to change United Nations policies, to help solve the severe problems of peace and injustice, of war and injustice in the third world. And I took great risks to do that, because in the United States, like I say, nobody cared about the third world. I mean, the idea of diverting our attention away from the Cold War, fighting the damn Soviets, in order to help the people in the third world, never occurred to the State Department or to the White House. So I was doing a lot of this on my own, and in some cases, I was making up my own foreign policy because the State Department wouldn't do it. So I was taking enormous risks. Only this time, they weren't physical risks. They were the risk of my career. They were, for want of a better word, spiritual risk, because I was looking for the
Give
heart.
us an example. Give us an example, if you don't mind.
Well, the biggest example, there are many examples, but the biggest example was, you mentioned it, I think, at the very beginning, was apartheid in South Africa. A system of institutionalized racism in South Africa. One of the first things I did when I arrived at the United Nations was go down to South Africa and take a look. And apartheid was really awful. A white minority was jailing and killing and beating up blacks for protesting. And there was a system of segregation in South Africa. And it was just awful. So I go down to South Africa to see for myself. And sure enough, I walked down the black ghettos outside of Johannesburg, and I would feel hundreds of pairs of black eyes staring with hate at the back of my white head. And then that evening, because I was still an American Foreign Service officer, I'd be wined and dined in some nice house behind a metal fence and guard dogs in the white sections of Johannesburg. And I was in the middle of this horrible system of racial oppression. And I came back and determined to do something about it. And I saw very soon what to do about it. The system of apartheid depended upon guns and military equipment being sent to the South African military and police, which they then used to kill blacks, to oppress blacks. And if I could cut off that supply of guns and military equipment through a United Nations embargo, I could cripple apartheid and cripple the white regime. And so I began to do that. It took a long time to gain the trust of the black South Africans, because they hated the United States at that time, and for good reason, because we were so hypocritical. I mean, the American president was making all these fine speeches about human rights. At the same time, American gun runners were letting guns slip through what was then a completely unworkable arms embargo to the South Africans, and apartheid continued. I determined to stop it. And so it took me a year to gain enough trust from the black South African nations on the Security Council, but I finally did. And I took enormous risks. I showed them secret documents, for example, on who in America was actually shipping the guns, and what American senators were aware of the huge amounts of money being made over gun running, and who were secretly supporting it in the Congress.
Can you name some of those people? Can you name some of those people now?
No. But they were basically Southern racist senators, basically Strom Thurmond, people like that. And they were crippling. And no matter what President Carter wanted to do, he couldn't do it And I determined that I would change all that. So I began doing this, and I began meeting secretly with Black members of the Security Council. That's to say, the members of Black African nations on the Security Council. I started meeting with them, and I began suggesting ways in which they could bring pressure on my own government. Of course, I would have been fired had my own government found out, but I kept doing it, and it really began to build a groundswell. African nations got more and more able to criticize the United States for its hypocrisy. I never forget, Sith, that I once read a cable that came from an African foreign minister to my boss, the American Secretary of State, complaining bitterly about American hypocrisy and allowing guns to go to the South African military and police while saying that we opposed apartheid. It was all bullshit. And in the middle of that cable, I wish I kept a copy of it. I didn't.
Me too.
There was a sentence in the middle of that cable that more or less word for word I had written 2 weeks or 3 weeks before, handed to my counterpart in New York, who had then sent it to his boss back in Africa, and it had come winging back to in this cable. There's no internet then. This cable to the American Secretary of State. And so following up that cable, which I say I had helped draft, a cable intensely critical of the United States, I go to my own people and say, look, we're getting hammered. The charges of hypocrisy are beginning to stick. We got to do something. So I finally convinced my own government to support a really tough arms embargo that would really stop the shipment of guns and military equipment to South Africa, and then to support it in the United Nations. And once the U.S. did that, and I was successful, once the U.S. did that, the other nations shipping guns would have to follow suit, and they did. And so in, I think it was May 2nd, 1973, I guess it was, whatever, the UN adopted an arms embargo. No, it wasn't 73. It was later than that, of course. Anyway, it was.
You said it was around Carter's time. Around Carter's time.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. I got mixed up there. It was
Right.
it was Carter's time before Reagan became president. Yeah. In any case, the UN adopted that arms embargo, and the supply of guns was finally shut off to the South African military and police. And in time, it helped end apartheid. And I've always felt that was one of the proudest moments of my life. I took enormous risks to do that. I could have been jailed for some of the stuff I had done, telling other people about America's secrets regarding the gun trade.
Ostensively, John, wouldn't you say you somewhat acted as an attaché or maybe a spy? Would that be safe enough to use those words?
Oh, well, I wasn't an attaché. I was a full-blown foreign service officer in charge of American policies toward Africa. I had a serious top-level job at the United Nations, and that's how I could get away with it, because I managed to hide what I was doing from my superiors. And I did it, and finally, the story picks up. The story I've already told picks up. Finally, when I had enough power behind the effort, I went to my own people and strongly suggested we had to back an arms embargo, which we did, and then the rest is history. That embargo really worked. It took a while, but it worked. And so I wasn't a spy. In the sense that that's not the right word. Maybe I was a traitor, at least to some right winger.
Okay. I didn't think of that word in the sense, because I felt some of your moral judgment was correct in how your heart was tugged at it. So, okay.
Yeah, and so of course the people in Congress were absolutely furious, but with the American agreement to back the embargo, over the objections of the racist members of the U.S. Senate, it happened, and like I say, I would have been in deep shit had Strom Thurmond and the others know that I had a role in that. They would, of course, have insisted that I be fired or worse.
Did they
So
ever
that's,
find out?
hmm?
Did they ever find out?
Oh, I don't know if they ever found out. Very quickly, a few months later, Ronald Reagan was elected president. So, but it was too late then. The embargo was in place, and all they could do was grumble. Um, whether they knew it was me or not, I don't know. I hid my. I was pretty damn clever, I must say. It was like talk about foreign intrigue. I mean, it was. I wasn't a spy, but I used a lot of those skills of hiding information and telling lies when I had to, and working behind the scenes. I did all of that, and it took like a year and a half or so, like I said, to set it all in motion so that I was finally ready to go to my own people and say, hey, look, we got to do something. We got to back this embargo because of pressures that I myself had created.
Now, during this time, had you encountered some of the efforts of persons like Mandela and his efforts? Were you aware of some of those things that were occurring, or Bishop Desmond Tutu and some of the other persons that were working during apartheid times to get things done? Were you involved in any of those situations?
Oh, of course. I wasn't involved. So, as a foreign service officer, I couldn't be public about this because I was still working for the U.S. government, who
Oh,
basically had a kind of hands-off view toward people like Tutu and Mandela, because that would have upset the whites in South Africa, whom we were in bed with at the time. So, but yeah, I met with black leaders. Of course, Nelson Mandela was still in prison on Robben's Island, so I didn't meet him. But with Tutu and others who were the members of the underground or the opposition, the black opposition in South Africa, sure. But I couldn't very well be seen hand in hand with them, you know. Otherwise, my own people would have gotten wind of what I was doing, and that would have been the end of it and the end of me. So I had to keep it fairly secret. Like I
for
say,
sure.
it was yeah. But yeah,
I've had the pleasure. I've had the pleasure of working with Desmond Tutu on his initiatives through an organization called Peace Jam here in the States
oh yes, I
some
heard
years
about it.
ago. Yes, and I, pardon me, worked with he and his daughter Naomi. They because Peace Jam, what it did was it connected Nobel Prize laureates with projects here in the United States, high school students, and that was particularly my field of interest. And the projects would be where the Nobel laureate winner would work on that specific project in person, and they would be a part of the whole resource program to do that. And his in particular was about a school in South Central Los Angeles and their gun issues and how to help establish ground rules that didn't require metal detectors and so forth. And when I began to work with him in particular for that, I won't forget this occasion that Peace Jam, when my company at that time put together the event together with Peace Jam, I got the opportunity to dance on stage with Bishop Tutu. And
Oh,
it was, I tell you, it was glorious. And then at the end of it, the long and short of it is, prior to this was the largest event that I had ever put on, and I was so honored to be working with Peace Jam and their efforts at that time, especially with young people. But it had been the most people I'd ever worked with. There's about 7,000 people at one time in one event, and I had to get ready to go on the stage. I already had just taken this picture with Desmond Tutu, and I'd been battling this nausea because I was so nervous. And my dear friend Val, I ran over to Val and I said, "I'm going to hurl." And I had 5 minutes before I'm supposed to run onto stage to greet Desmond Tutu, Betty White, and 9 of the Nobel Prize laureates. And I'm feeling so nauseous, I tell you, John. And I said, "I'm going to hurl. I'm going to hurl." She said, "You can't. You have 5 minutes." And the music is playing, the bands are doing it, and they bring me over to the stage. And then I go over to Naomi, his daughter, and I could feel the hurl coming up. And I'm just thinking, please don't, please don't. And I'm thinking, and as soon as they're doing the intro and I'm about to run on the stage, Oh, it just was, "Arr!" And Naomi, his daughter's right there, and he had just walked over. And then Val had to hurry up and wipe my face, and I had to run on stage and then run through the audience and come back on and introduce Desmond and all the others. And as I ran through the crowds to come back up to the stage, Desmond was already starting to dance to a Bob Marley song, oddly enough, and I had to just pull it together. And he said, I never will forget, he tapped my shoulder, and we have all these people there, and he said, "You're going to be all right. The first time you throw up, it's over after that." And then we just booty danced on the stage. And working with them in that project, aside from that story itself, was one of the biggest honors of my life, because I did see that, like you, his mission was really not just apartheid, but continuing a mission of peace, getting people to understand peace. And that was one of the biggest things that impacted me in meeting him during that time. It was just what a great pleasure and honor it was. So I was very glad. Thank you for letting me share that story, because he was instrumental, pardon me, in my continued efforts in teaching young people about peace and cooperation and mediation, because I find the conversations about those and negotiations were becoming lost, that we can communicate, and those are ways to resolve things without it coming to violence. But I'm glad I got to share that with you, having met him yourself.
Well, it's interesting. At least you're not known as, oh, Baxter, the guy that threw up all over Desmond.
I know, John. I know. Only a few people say.
To be famous for that would be a little, embarrassing.
Yes, it would. And
the one thing I brought back from South Africa, I have a wonderful staff. It's in my living room as we speak. It was given to me by Chief Buthelezi, the chief of the Zulus, who worked with Desmond Tutu with the Zulu people to organize them to oppose apartheid. So yeah, it was a long, hard movement. As you well know, fighting apartheid took decades, but
yes.
Cutting off the supply of guns turned out to be a powerful lever. And it allowed things like the economic embargoes, for example, and other aspects of the peace movement. And it put pressure on that finally got Nelson Mandela freed from Robben Island. So all these factors came together to finally end apartheid. But, I was part of that, and I'm proud of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you would. That was one of the things I felt so impressed with and humbled that to be speaking with you about, because it was during my youth. It was a huge thing during my youth. Apartheid here in the United States, the conversation was it became very feverish at one point. Now, I'm curious, where along the timeline, because one of the things in your history is the shipwreck. You experienced a shipwreck. Was that prior to this, or somewhere along this lines? Because that was one of the other stories I would love for you to share with us.
Well, remember I said earlier that it was my change of life was 3 steps up and 2 back, right? Anyway, there I am at the United Nations. I'm feeling pretty damn good about myself after this apartheid thing. And then I realized that I could no longer work for the U.S. government, because they were the opposition. And even if they were the good guys, they weren't nearly willing to go to all the lengths I was to make the world a better place, to help really solve peace and justice issues, especially in the third world. So even though I was an up and comer, I mean, I was probably I was one of the youngest senior officers in the U.S. Foreign Service at that time. I quit because I realized that with Ronald Reagan as president, it would be hopeless for me to try to continue the actions that I had just done at the United Nations. So I quit. So there I am. I got a head full now of ideals. My life is totally transformed. I'm looking for ways to make a difference. I always had a good gift of gab. So I decided that I would launch myself as a public speaker. And sure enough, I went all around lecturing for the then peace movement because it was in the middle of the Cold War, right? And I didn't get anywhere. I mean, I would speak to lots of appreciative crowds, but I was preaching to the converted, and I was getting really confused by that. And then I met a remarkable woman named Ann Medlock, who started another movement for change. She called it the Giraffe Heroes Project. She called it giraffes because the giraffes have a long neck. And what she was doing was looking for people who were sticking their necks out. The metaphor being brave.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
She was looking for people who were sticking their necks out to make the world a better place, to help solve tough public problems, no matter where in the world they were. And these people, of course, were male and female. They were every color in the rainbow, every walk of life. And she was finding these people and telling their stories, because looking around, she was a single mother in New York City while I was at the United Nations. She was looking around, and all the media in New York City were all telling the stories of gloom and doom, all the things that, if it bleeds, it leads, so they used to say. All the bad news made the newspapers, but nobody was telling the stories of the good news, the real heroes amongst us. Ann Medlock determined to do that, and she had an incredible number of guts, amount of guts, and so she starts basically her own news service as a rival to ABC from her apartment in Central Park West, finding these stories. Of course, in those days, there's no internet, so she was doing it with fax machines and paper press releases, and then she started using vinyl discs. Some of your viewers, I don't even probably know what a vinyl disc is. It's a flat piece of plastic, goes round and round on a turntable, and sound comes out. She would find these giraffe heroes, and she would get a recording of their story, and then she would get a star of stage and screen, which wasn't that hard to do in New York City, to do the voiceovers and create these 4 or 5 minute segments, put them on video discs, send them to radio stations who would play them. And it was at first small stations, but then it caught on, and the Giraffe Heroes Project caught on. It's about that time I noticed what she was doing. At the same time, my own lectures were falling flat. I wasn't getting anywhere, and the Giraffe Heroes Project was really getting a foothold. But at that same time, I decided to leave the Foreign Service. So I left the Foreign Service and realized all of a sudden that I was broke. I had used, in all my lecturing, I hadn't made a dime. So I used up all of my severance pay, and I was literally broke. So I had to find a way to make some money. And a friend of mine says, well, look, you've always been a good speaker. Why don't you lecture on cruise ships? I said, what, really? He said, oh, yeah, they pay a lot of money for guys like you to go out on cruise ships, and you give a couple lectures to the passengers, and they pay, And sure enough, our very first try, I got a job lecturing on the SS Princeton Dam, which was a cruise ship leaving from Vancouver for a summer in the Far East. Cruise ships, it was small by today's standard, only 550 people, passengers, and not thousands, but nonetheless, it was a cruise ship. And I got to take my daughter Mallory with me, who was then 13 years old. And we go out to Vancouver. I then left the Foreign Service, and I'm lecturing on this cruise ship. I'm being paid an absurd amount of money to give a couple lectures on American foreign policy. They didn't care what I talked about. And so anyway, there I am, 3 days out from Vancouver. That ship is leaving the Alaska coast and heading across the North Pacific. About 140 miles off the Alaska coast, the ship catches fire and ultimately sinks. But it catches fire, and we're all woken up in the middle of the night, and we're given disarming messages that the fire had been put out, and it really hadn't been. So all the passengers are up on deck, and very few of them have warm clothes or even life vests. But then the fire gets it has not been put out. And after about an hour and a half or so, the fire has started in the engine room. The flames leap upward and bust out the windows in the ship's lounge and the dining room. And all of a sudden, the ship is torched with a sheet of flame going 30 feet into the night sky, obscuring the northern lights. It's like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And we're all called to lifeboat stations, and the captain comes out on the bridge. He has his full dress uniform on. I didn't know it. Maybe you don't know it, but when a ship is about to go down, the captain has to put on a full dress uniform
Oh,
because
I
he's
didn't
supposed to
know
go
that.
down with the ship, right? So anyway, he comes out and he says, "We're sorry, but we can't put the fire out, and we're going to get into lifeboats." And so all of you get into lifeboats. And so Mallory and I are put in lifeboat number 2. It says on the side it's made for 45 people. Well, there's 90 people waiting for lifeboat number 2 because they never thought this cruise ship was a new cruise ship. So never it had all the safety precautions and stuff, not enough. But no one thought it would sink. So it was poorly prepared and it was utter chaos. But by some miracle, 6 lifeboats and a couple rafts take just about all the 550 people, except for the captain and a few members of the crew. And by some miracle, there's no lives lost getting into the lifeboats. Now, mind you, this is a cruise ship, so just about everybody on it is an old person, right? People don't go on cruise ships when they're 25. So it's a bunch of elderly people in the lifeboats, and we're all lowered away. And in fact, being jammed into a boat meant for far fewer people helped because it helped keep us warm. Remember, there's no warm clothes down there. So we're in this jam-packed lifeboat. Luckily, the sea is calm at that moment, so that's why nobody got killed getting into the lifeboat on the burning ship. The problem is that a typhoon's coming on. Typhoon Vernon is bearing down on us, and so very soon, 3, 4 in the morning, the typhoon hits, and the sea gets choppy, and the lifeboats separate from the burning ship. Helicopters finally arrive from the coast, and then a big tanker comes, answers the SOS, and comes to the rescue. But the tanker can't rescue the lifeboats. The tanker is far too big. You can't get too close to the lifeboats or it'll swamp them. The only way to get people rescued is one by helicopters. So they lower a chair on a metal chain, and one person at a time gets plucked out of a lifeboat, winched up into a helicopter, and when the helicopter has 7 or 8 people, it flies to the deck of the tanker and drops the person on the deck of the tanker because, like I say, the tanker can't get close to the lifeboats. Helicopters solve that problem. But one by one, it's slow work, and the sea is getting worse and worse. But they go as fast as they can. And so about noon, the typhoon is really bearing down. I see my 13-year-old daughter, Mallory, finally rescued, pulled up into a helicopter and taken to the tanker. Then the helicopters send word down that they can't fly anymore because now we're in a very serious storm. I mean, serious. The storm is so bad, it's like 60 knot winds and seas built to over 30 feet, which means that your lifeboat's going up and down 60 feet. And helicopters can't fly in that weather, suicidal. So the helicopters are gone. And the only hope for us, and by now, almost everybody has been rescued. There's just 8 of us left in lifeboat number 2, plus some others in another lifeboat. But they at least had some paramedics jump in and rig tarps and stuff to keep them from freezing to death. We'd had none of that. The 8 of us in lifeboat number 2, we were freezing to death. And I recognized hypothermia from my mountaineering days. And I knew we were all going to die of hypothermia in 6 or 8 hours. But the key thing was the light. It was still some light out. Now we're talking about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, October, Gulf of Alaska. In the fading light, there were a couple of Coast Guard cutters frantically searching for us. The Coast Guard cutters had been steaming full speed from Sitka and finally arrived on the scene. But it was in the middle of a typhoon, visibility down to maybe 100 yards at most. Typhoon, dying of hypothermia, 60-foot winds, 60-knot winds, 30-foot seas. We were bailing frantically, the 8 of us in lifeboat number 2. But it was obvious that as soon as the light failed, as soon as the sun went down, we were dead, because it was a miracle if the Coast Guard cutters, the ships, rescue ships, would find us with a daylight. But once it was dark, there was no hope whatsoever because we had no flares. The radio didn't work. We had no radio, nothing like that. We were all dying of hypothermia. And so when it was dark, we were dead. And it was going to be dark in an hour. So I look up and I realized that for the first time in my life, it looked like my luck was going to run out. All these adventures I'd had, all these incredible adventures, I'd walked away from all of them. But now, man, the odds were so extreme. It looked like I was just not going to make it. And so I sat there in this wild pitching storm, hanging on for dear life on the lifeboat. I could feel hypothermia beginning to kill me. I was going to drift off into sleep and never wake up. And then it hit me that, damn it, this wasn't fair. I wasn't a religious person. But man, I tell you, it just all of a sudden occurred to me that, hey, after that episode in Vietnam, I had changed my life. I had helped end apartheid, for God's sake. And so I looked up at whatever was out there. Call it God, call it whatever. Maybe it was just the wind, but it was something bigger than me out there. And I just began yelling at God or whatever it was, saying, damn it, this is stupid. Here I am. I helped end apartheid. I'm devoting the rest of my life to making your world a better place, and you're killing me? That makes no sense at all. I thought, God, that your universe was logical, orderly, like the patterns on a snowflake. But now this makes no sense at all. Here you've got me as an engine for peace and justice, finally, and you're killing me? Makes no sense at all. God damn it, it's not fair. And I heard a voice back out of that storm. Like I say, I think it was something bigger than me. Call it God, call it whatever. Maybe it was the wind, but I heard this voice. And the voice, in effect, said, I'm choosing my own words now. Stop bullshitting me, John. Yeah, sure. You've been doing great work at the United Nations. You helped end apartheid. Now you're lecturing on a cruise ship because you lost your nerve. You lost your nerve. You're panicked over money. And if you get out of this, you'll lecture on another cruise ship because it's a pretty copacetic existence, right? You're making a lot of money lecturing to little old ladies and oldsters on cruise ships. You got to get serious about the ideals you discovered at the United Nations. You got to get serious about it, or else you'll die out here. It's your choice. Whoa! I heard that challenge. It was basically shit or get off the pot. Excuse my words, but that's what it was. And so I don't even think about it. I look at this challenge, shit or get off the pot. I mean, get serious about your idea. I mean,
it just tickles me.
Yeah. Trust that you'll get the money to live on it, and I looked up into this wild storm, and I say one word. I say, okay. And in that instant, and I know this sounds like the end of a grade B movie, but I swear to you and your viewers, it is the truth. In that instant, when I said, okay, and looked up into the teeth of this wild storm, the Coast Guard cutter Boutwell comes crashing out of the mist, out of the storm. Would have cut us in two had it not seen us. It was that bang on. And so we get rescued. Yeah, we get rescued.
As soon as right after you said, okay.
That's right after. I mean, like seconds, it seemed. And so I said, oh, shit, here we go. I did it. I'm not going to die. But I made a promise out there. I got back to New York. I kept that promise, and I've kept it for the next 50 years. I've kept that promise. I go back to New York, no longer in the Foreign Service, but I'm now totally entranced with what Ann Medlock is doing. Remember, I told you her story, the Giraffe Heroes Project. Yes. And I wanted to help her. Then I fell madly in love with her. We fell madly in love, and everything we were doing became a lot more serious. And so I began to work with Ann. And it's been now 44 years. Ann and I have been married for 44 years. Business partners running the Giraffe Heroes Project, 44 years. Now we've discovered over 2,000 of these giraffe heroes that Ann was beginning to find from that apartment on Central Park West. And we've told the stories of these 2,000 people. And I know we've inspired lots of other people. Anne's strategy wasn't new, telling stories. As you know, Seth, as a storyteller, wasn't new.
Yes.
People have been telling stories to inspire others to heroism since the Neanderthals were dancing around their campfire. It's been the way that cultures have always used to promote heroism. Tell the stories of heroes. Don't preach at people. Give them examples. And that's what the Giraffe Project was doing. And now we found these 2,000 heroes, 44 years, telling their stories. We've also, of course, done lots of other stuff. We created a schools curriculum, helping young people build lives of courage and compassion. I've written 4 books now, all on the themes of courage and making a difference and civic action, helping give people the tools once they're inspired to do something about it. I do all kinds of blogging and podcasts. I've started a series of short form videos, particularly aimed at young people, and it's called Badass Granddad. I'm having great fun doing it.
That is so great. Badass
And
granddad.
it's, I did it as a kind of a lark. They're just short 3-minute videos. I start each video with one of my adventure stories, and then I segue onto a life lesson tied to that adventure story. And the life lesson for that day might be about courage or perseverance or whatever. And then by then I have the people's attention, so I can tell this life lesson and then end the 3 minutes with a call to action. And I just did the 60-second one, put it in, uploaded it just yesterday. It's on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. Just dial up in the search box, Badass Granddad, badass, all one word, Granddad with 2 D's in the middle, not one. And you'll see what I'm talking about. It's been great. It's been very successful. As of yesterday, I had 112,000 followers, which they tell me is pretty damn good, and well over a
It's
million.
really good.
1.2 million viewers. And so, there I am. So we've been doing all this now for 44 years, Seth, and I'm 83 years old now, and I ain't about to stop, and neither is Anne. And so Anne and I are working together on the Giraffe Project, writing books, blogs, whatever, having the time of our lives, and I think making a hell of a difference. And me being on your show is a great way for me to reach more people. So thank you, Seth, for inviting me on.
Well, John, I have to tell you, and I said this a little bit to you earlier. To me, you are one of those living heroes, and I don't undersay that or to blow smoke in your direction. It's just that I think some of the storytelling, in particular, you mentioned as a storyteller myself, but it is this connective tissue to our spirits that is a truth that isn't like the written word or anything else. And we've been doing it so long that I think it's what keeps us connected, is when you're able to tell the story in such a way. And to me, you've done that. And I can't say enough about your efforts with Giraffe Heroes Project and what you're doing and how important that work is. So to me, it's me who thanks you. And I'm hoping to steal some of your Instagram followers. So,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I got to tell you,
Absolutely.
I got to tell you, I'm so looking forward to my audience hearing your story, and I'm hoping that you'll be willing to come back to us and maybe give us some insight on your thoughts about today's situations that are going on in global politics. I'd love to hear your take on some of those things. In particular, some of the things that are going on within our own borders within Minnesota, and or give us some insight and some storytelling on your books. I would love to have you back again to share some of those with us, because this has been one of the most rewarding interviews I've done in a while. And you have just been a complete pleasure and joy and honor. And to me, the experiences that you've had that brought you to this place to us today, that we are blessed for and honored for having you with us to be able to share them.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, I'd love to come back on. And yes, I'd love to talk about current events. I think we needed to lay some groundwork today, and I'm happy to have done that. I'd love to come back on and talk about what's going on, especially in this country. And also, as a former Foreign Service officer, I stay up on foreign affairs, so we can talk some about that as well. And also, I know you got show notes and stuff, but the Giraffe Project, which is the core of my work, the background for my work, its URL is very simple, simply giraffe.org, not com, O-R-G. So your listeners can immediately go straight there and get a lot more information on what the Giraffe Heroes Project does, the work that I and Ann Medlock have been pursuing for these 44 years.
I will also attach that in our link once the video is released and published. I'd like to, with your permission. And then again, it is of extreme importance to me because I think, John, and I'm sure you'd agree, I think there has been such a switch in the United States. I'm fascinated to hear your take on some of what you're seeing. So can we try and do this again in 2 weeks and you and I will speak behind the scenes?
Sure. I don't know. I have to look at my calendar, but yeah,
for sure.
2 weeks, 3 weeks anyway. In the near future, we can absolutely do it.
For sure. This has been a sincere pleasure and a joy, John. I can't say enough about it, as I've already mentioned. Please accept my humblest appreciation and gratitude for my audience and myself for being here with me today. And please do know, I just think you are one of the super coolest dudes I've met in the longest of times. And your storytelling ability, along with what you experienced, I just feel privileged and God blessed to have met you and had shared this experience with our audience.
Well, thank you for what you do, Seth. And I think all of your background, I hope your listeners all look at your LinkedIn background, the stuff you've done, especially your work with kids. You're a treasure. And thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, John. You really touched my heart today. And I'm very grateful to God to have this experience.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I say the Lovolution that we want at the end of the program is the revolution we want. So with John and my sincere call to action, go out and create a Lovolution. It's a revolution of war. Spread more love today. Be kind to yourself, eat healthy, and do good things, not only for yourself, but for your neighbors. And realize, I'd like to steal John's words here at the end of his video, which I advise all of you to go see. It touched my heart dearly. We'd have kept him. At the end of it, pardon me, and some of his bio says, what are you going to do with this wild and adventurous life of yours? I think that is the call to action for all of us today. What are you going to do with this wild, adventurous life of yours, the gift that we've been given? Please share this video, let people know, give a like to us, and look forward to your words in the comments. And we look forward to having John Graham back with us again. This is Seth Guru Baxter with the Seth Guru Podcast on Maker's Bar, creating 1 million leaders today for tomorrow. Today, you have seen history and one of those leaders that is inspiring others to become leaders themselves. John Graham, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And by the way, that quote comes from a poem by Mary Oliver. It wasn't me, but it's a famous
Okay.
quote.
Oh, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for correcting me. Thank you. I love it. It has been sticking with me for days since I read it. So thank you, John. Right.